Good afternoon. We're back with more Marvel Snap, and today we're going to go over the patch notes. The patch notes for December 5th, 2023, which is today. We'll go over the patch notes, we'll go over each of the cards that have been changed and how that changes their place on the tier list if they are Series 4 or 5 cards. Pretty big patch today, adding in the deck builder, which is an interesting change. That's going to affect the meta. We're going to see more decks that are optimized than we used to. Because I think there are a lot of casual players who couldn't be bothered to go to a website like Snap.fan or Marvel Snap Zone or something like that to look up a deck. And even if they did go there, they might not know how to search through the stats or to identify which decks are the best. So depending on how good this deck builder is, they say it operates off of data about which are the best cards or decks. That's going to affect the meta. That's going to make it more difficult to climb, I predict, especially at the low ranks. And so this is not good news for any player at the low ranks who was previously already looking up the best decks and pretty good at identifying the best decks. Because this makes it easier for everyone to do that, and that'll increase the competition. So I expect most players at like 70 plus ranks and then Infinite were already doing this. But at the low ranks, this will make competition stiffer and it'll make the climb harder. That's my prediction. Albums, we get a reward for albums. I don't know what those rewards will be, so I can't comment on them. Featured mystery variants, emotes, I could not care less about. I note they still have not added a universal mute option. Voiceover, so let's dive into the balance changes. First up, America Chavez. It used to be a 6/9 that started on the bottom of your deck, and you would draw it on turn 6. It is now a 2/3 with an on reveal. The top card of your deck gets +2 power. So functionally a 2/5 if you want to play the card that you draw. You won't always. For example, if you were playing this in High Evolutionary and you buffed the High Evolutionary, or you buff in some decks Enchantress or Shang-Chi, and it doesn't end up being a card that you ever play, then America Chavez is only a 2/3, but generally she's a 2/5 and also will synergize decently well with Sebastian Shaw, so I do expect her to see a lot of play. She'll probably see play in some pretty good decks. The developers note, we know that America Chavez has been a beloved card, and this rework is a major change. She doesn't behave the way we want cards to. She often isn't played or used for fun synergies. Just a percentage increase on drawing other cards, which is beloved by players but not in the developer's vision for the game, is essentially what they're saying. Well, developers, my opinion is that when a card is beloved by players and not an issue balance-wise, which I don't think America Chavez was, you shouldn't change it. If a card is not an issue balance-wise and the players love it, that's a card that's working really well, and changing it because it doesn't fit in your vision for the game is egotistical and not a good idea. Players loving something in your game is a rarity. How many games are out there where players don't love anything in the game? That's a gift. Be grateful and don't try to fix what isn't broken. That's my opinion. That being said, America Chavez is fine as she is now, the new America Chavez, and she will see play. Next up we have Alioth. Old version of Alioth was a 6/3 with the on reveal destroy all enemy cards played here. This is the old Alioth pictured. Well, actually, sort of. It's the old power total, 6/3. Destroy all enemy cards played here this turn, including unrevealed cards. The new Alioth is now a 6/2 that only destroys all unrevealed enemy cards here. So, if you do not have priority and the opponent reveals their cards first, Alioth will do nothing. If you do have priority and you play Alioth, he will destroy cards exactly as he did before. He will just have one less power while doing it. The developer note, Alioth has enjoyed an interesting position in Snap as a card with an acceptable win rate and cube rate, but a bad reputation, so his stats are fine but the players don't like him. We've monitored the latter alongside performance as we expected time and experience would help. They expected players would learn to play around him, and they wouldn't be frustrated by him, but they should have known that players would. That would never happen because that's what happened with Leader. Leader, for those of you who are newer to the game, Leader used to be a card that copied all of the cards that your opponent would play onto your side instead of just the highest power total. And players whined incessantly about that as they were never able to play around Leader to their own satisfaction. Seems Alioth has fallen into the same pit. His win rate's fine, his cube rate's fine, but players don't like him because they don't feel like they can play around him adequately. So he got nerfed because players don't like him. This changes Alioth from a catch-all endgame threat that's especially good when revealing first to absolutely requiring it. So here's the thing. Alioth costs 6,000 tokens. He's a Series 5 card, or he cost Spotlight Caches to acquire him. They're changing a card that is fine in terms of win rate, fine in terms of cube rate, but players just don't like playing against him. And they're offering no refund to the players who purchased him using tokens. You could have purchased him yesterday. I got a question on my channel from a player yesterday who was wondering if you should buy him. And I recommended that he wait until today to see what the patch brought. But if players did buy him yesterday, now they're out of luck, no refund. And why? Because other players, presumably players who don't have the card, didn't like playing against it. You gotta offer a refund for these nerfs. For Series 5 cards, you just have to. This is not acceptable behavior for a business. Hearthstone does offer refunds for nerfs. When a card is a Series 5 card or a Series 4 card and it costs significant real world resources in order to acquire a card like that, it can be anywhere from $50 to $100 or more. $50 for like a single Spotlight Cache is the ballpark for what I've seen. If it took you 2 or 3 or 4 Spotlight Caches, that could be anywhere from $50 to $200 to acquire Alioth. And now he's worse. Doesn't sit well. You gotta offer something to players to compensate for their nerfed cards. The logic for why this got nerfed, okay, I mean, you made a card that people didn't like playing against. That should have been predictable because I saw him as fulfilling a similar role as Leader. So they should have been able to predict that in advance, but they didn't, and now they're changing him after people already bought him. That just is not good business practices. It really isn't. As for where the new Alioth falls, he's worse, so I'd move him down from S tier, must buy, to at least low A tier, but he's probably going to land in the niche category. He's only going to work in decks where you have initiative almost all the time in the final turn. Every time that you don't have initiative in the final turn, Alioth is just a dead card, and another card that could help you catch up won't be in your deck. So I think he's probably a niche card now, and there's a lot of other cards that I'd put ahead of him, but it's entirely possible after playtesting he's still going to land in the A tier, but I think he's dropped a couple of tiers. Luke Cage used to be a 2/2. Ongoing, your cards can't have their power reduced. It's now a 2/3. With the ongoing effect, your cards here can't have their power reduced. So he no longer protects cards anywhere on the board, and he only protects cards at the one location. And he has received 1 power as compensation. Overall, this is a nerf to Luke Cage. When Luke Cage debuted, cards that reduced power weren't popular. We've since added more and made balance adjustments, thus Luke has become stronger. We've also seen him in good decks combining multiple low-cost tech cards to turn off a variety of enemy routes to victory, so he's a control card. We've re-evaluated the kind of impact low-cost cards should have and ultimately don't feel it's healthy for them to shut off higher-cost investments. So they're nerfing low-cost control cards. If you're going to play control cards, they want them to cost more. They also nerfed Goliath, though, who's a control card. Okay. As a design philosophy, not wanting there to be low power control cards will result in a faster meta and a less control oriented meta, a more combo oriented meta. I don't have a problem with that. We'll see where the meta lands after this. See if it's an improvement. This does make Luke Cage worse. Shadow King. Shadow King used to be a 2/3. He is now a 2/2. Not really that much change for Shadow King. I think he still sees a lot of play. They're nerfing him because they nerfed Luke Cage, and so people will see Luke Cage less. I don't really understand that logic. Just facing a lot less Luke and avoiding Luke's location is probably worth a power. What? Why? I don't ever recall Luke Cage being a problem for Shadow King when I play Shadow King. Why would facing less Luke Cage be better for him? I'll have to think about that. Maybe there's something I'm just not seeing, but I don't ever recall playing Shadow King and thinking Luke Cage was a problem. Okay. Well, Elsa Bloodstone. Elsa has been changed from a 2/2. If you play another card to fill a location, give it +2 power. And Elsa is now a 2/3. After you play a card that fills this location, give it +2 power. So that's a nerf to Elsa overall. She no longer affects cards that fill up locations on other parts of the board, only her own location, which means her ceiling is a 2/5. And she's not always going to be a 2/5. I'd say she's worse than America Chavez now. There are 2 major changes here, one to how Elsa is triggered and another to where. We previously placed Elsa's effect in the same timing window as Shuri. So that's like a timing thing. I'm not sure that matters. We've also decided Elsa's multi-location buff was an element of her strength as a 2-cost we didn't want. The new timing is a buff and her strength was mostly focused on a single location. But we didn't want to accidentally over-nerf her, so we're adding power for compensation. They still over-nerfed her. She should be a 2/4 if they didn't want a power decrease. This logic is terrible because it's inconsistent. So we've decided that she's too strong for a 2-cost basically, but we still have Collector Loki. We still have Carnage. There's strong 2-cost cards. The multi-location buff. This card was not overpowered. In fact, I rarely saw it. It's good in Thanos, but you don't see Thanos that much. So maybe the situation is this. I have a reason to suspect, having read these patch notes already, that there's going to be like a Thanos buff coming. And maybe they thought that if they didn't nerf Elsa, then Thanos would be too strong. Especially since Blob's probably going to nerf Darkhawk, and that's one of the main reasons people don't play Thanos, because Darkhawk is really good against Thanos. So maybe they're thinking ahead. If they're not, this nerf doesn't make sense. Especially since it's a Series 5 card, and they don't compensate players for those when they're nerfed. Kitty Pryde. Kitty Pryde is now a 1-1. She was a 1-0. Potentially good with Elsa, but she still was before. Luke Cage's adjustment muddies the water a little bit on exactly how strong Elsa will be. They don't know how strong Elsa will be. She'll be a 2-5 at best. Unless you're playing like movement cards where you can play Jeff and then move him away, but they should know how strong Elsa's going to be. She's not going to be as strong. So they're open to OTA-ing Kitty Pryde if she seems too strong. I don't think she's going to be. So where do we move Elsa? Elsa was previously a niche card. She now drops to a C tier card. Kitty Pryde was an A tier card. 1 power simply moves her up the A tier a little bit. Doesn't move her to S tier, in my opinion. So that's where we land with Elsa and Kitty. Ebony Blade, which is part of the Black Knight card. Of course, Black Knight, after you discard a card, add the Ebony Blade to your hand with that card's power. This is the Ebony Blade. Now has the ability can't be destroyed and its power can't be reduced. So that's a bit of a buff to Black Knight. He released a little weaker than we aimed. That's true, though the cards seem pretty fun. Okay. So, Shadow King's popularity hit Ebony Blade. This buff is just fine. No problem with it. Does make Black Knight a little better. Not a lot better. I mean, maybe we can move him up to D tier. He's still kind of hard and unwieldy to play, and the deck that's the best with him, which is like the Dracula deck, isn't that good, so he needed more than that to make him good, or to make that deck good. Maybe Black Knight needed to go to like a 1-3 would probably have done it. Maybe, yeah, 1-3 probably. Or you could decrease the cost of Ebony Blade to 3. That would have done it as well. As it is, he moves up slightly, but not a lot. At least that's my prediction. Ravonna Renslayer is now a 2-3. Used to be a 2-1. Our internal playtesting evaluations for Ravonna clearly missed low. She was like a 50% win rate card before. I would say this brings her in line with Zabu. Zabu is a 2-2, but Zabu buffs more cards because there's more 4-drops, or he reduces the cost of more cards because there's more 4-drops than there are cards with 1 power or less. So they also gave Ravonna 1 more power than Zabu has. So she provides cost reduction for fewer cards, but she provides more power. This brings her in line with Zabu, in my opinion, and I would move her up. I think she's eventually going to land in the S tier. This buffs the Darkhawk deck temporarily, I think. But Darkhawk is going to get hit when Blob comes into the game. But my opinion is that Ravonna is eventually going to land in the S tier once the meta runs its course in the early part of this season. Mind Stone. This is the reason why I think they're going to buff Thanos. So the developer note, some design ideas we've played around with, for future effects. involved granting a player a random Infinity Stone, which was really fun unless you got Mind Stone. While we like a bit of high variance every now and then, this frustration was worth solving. We're making this change ahead of the effect in order to see if and how it affects Thanos' deck. So instead of drawing two stones from your deck, you draw two 1-cost cards, which becomes one of the best cards in the game. So that's a buff for Thanos decks, which is one reason they might have nerfed Elsa, because she was good in Thanos. Okay. I have no issue with buffing Thanos. He might need a little bit of buff, but one of the main... I think he's fine, except for Darkhawk. So, once Blob is available, then... I think Blob is going to be really good in Thanos. Really, really good in Thanos. And so, when Blob comes out, Thanos is going to be just fine. He's not going to need any buffs, and that may be why they nerfed Elsa. Looking ahead, because they're not going to have another patch until January. So, hopefully, that's why they nerfed Elsa. I would not disagree with that logic. It's not what they said in their notes, but I would like to know that they have some foresight. Because at times it seems like they don't, and they're just focused on short-term profits, which is disheartening when you like a game. Move update. Unrevealed cards can't be moved, mostly. So that changes a variety of cards. It's a nerf for move cards. So they're just future-proofing? Okay, well, I really have no idea of knowing if this is a good change or not till I see the future cards. Spider-Man. On reveal, move to another location and pull an enemy card from here to there, so it won't be an unrevealed card, but I don't think it was before. Not really sure. Stegron. Stegron is now a 4/6 instead of a 4/5. That's fine. Does that change him from an F to a D? Probably, but it's not a major buff, so I don't think we're going to see him that much still. Juggernaut is unchanged, essentially, in how he functions. They've added some text to make that clear, given how they're going to change the way that unrevealed cards are affected by movement. Juggernaut only moves cards that are still under your opponent's control. This means Green Goblin won't move if it's already revealed and changed sides. Okay. It's a minor thing. It's probably just a programming thing. Arrow. Arrow was a 5/8, which moved the last enemy card played this turn. Now a 5/9 that moves the last enemy card played anywhere. So a card that could be played in previous turns can be moved by Arrow now, and she's received +1 power. She's another card I think was fine in her original form when she moved all cards played, but players found it too upsetting to play against. Is this a buff to Arrow or a nerf? This means that instead of always moving a card that's played on turn 5, she will now sometimes move a card that was played earlier. That gives you more control over what's moved, because you're not always going to know what's being played on turn 5, but you always know what was played on turn 4. So it gives you more control over what's moved in some situations, but on average you'll be moving a less powerful card. They think it played out as a bit of a nerf, so they gave her an additional power. Since she was moving a slightly less powerful card some of the time, yeah, I could see that being a bit of a nerf, so they gave her one more power. Overall, she's probably not any stronger than she was before, or weaker. Though I do tend to think that giving the players more control over what is moved is a buff for skilled players. So, my opinion, she's actually a little stronger than she was before. So, this is where we land. No cards turned into a must-buy. One card turned from a must-buy Alioth into most likely a niche card, maybe an A-tier card. We'll see. Actually, one card did turn into a must-buy. That was Ravonna Renslayer with a +2 power buff. She's probably the biggest winner of the patch. Biggest loser is Alioth. Minor wins for Black Knight Stegron, Kitty Pryde, and a loss for Elsa Bloodstone. Werewolf was not hit at all. So Loki Werewolf's going to be the top deck in the new meta, at least for the time being. Darkhawk decks weren't hit at all, so Darkhawk decks are going to be strong now with the addition of Ravonna Renslayer. So if the meta before was Lockdown, Control, Darkhawk, and Werewolf Loki, with Destruction thrown in as well, and some Annihilus sometimes, or just Annihilus being part of one of those decks. The new meta, less location control, but still Werewolf, still Darkhawk. Is that better? I think there's going to be a lot more Silver Surfer as well with Sebastian Shaw. So where would I put Sebastian Shaw? At first glance, probably A tier. That's my first impression of him. Probably A tier. Probably like mid A tier. So that is all for now, and thank you for watching.